Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today you join me round my garage on this very wet and miserable day. It's pissing down with rain, which made the drive here in my Mk1 Escort quite interesting and loads of fun. In my last video I mentioned that I've got some good and bad news about the Mark II, which I'm going to go into later on in this video. Right now I need to get myself down to power engineering to see Zak, who is going to be doing a little bit of a modification to the water rail on my other Escort, my ST17 Mark I. Here is the ST170 engine that I removed from the Mark I in my last video, which will hopefully be going back in the car very soon. This is the water rail I'm using, which I got in a package of parts which came with the ST170 lump. Obviously this bit bolts to the cylinder head, and then this bit bolts onto there, something like that. I'm not sure which company actually made this water rail. It looks very similar to the one that Retro Ford sell nowadays, but it's not exactly the same. So if anyone out there knows which company made this water rail, do let me know in the comment section. I bought a set of silicone coolant hoses from Retro Ford, which are obviously designed to be used with their water rail. And this is the top hose here that goes from the radiator to the water rail. This end luckily does fit my radiator, but this end does not fit my water rail. So what I'm planning to do is have Zak weld on a thicker bit of pipe onto the end of this, like a reducer, so that then the coolant hose will fit nice and tightly. Now the other option would be to obviously have another silicone hose made up with a smaller bore at this end, but to be honest, this water rail is a little bit too long and I want to have a bead of weld put on it so that the hose is much more secure on there. So Zak will obviously weld in a larger bit of pipe at the end and then put a bead of weld on it for me as well. And I've marked here exactly where I want the water rail to stop. Also, he's going to weld on a little tab onto the actual tube so that I'll be able to bolt it to the head here, which will make it a lot more secure. I think this water rail has been made so that you can use it with the standard ZAK'S thermostat. As you can see, the diameter of it fits quite nicely into that recess. But I've got a bit of a problem. Now, obviously, this will sit this way in this end of the water rail, and this metal disc, which is spring loaded on the bottom of the thermostat, is preventing it to be fully pushed into that pipe. Now obviously I could compress the spring and then it will sit flush, but ultimately that metal disc is going to be stopping the water flowing anyway. So what I'm thinking is maybe I need to cut off this disc carefully so that then it will sit in there nicely and it won't hinder the flow of the water. If any of you know why there'd be any reason why I shouldn't cut this disc off, please let me know in the comments. Or even better, if you could tell me what this metal disc is actually for when it's used in a standard ZAK'S thermostat housing. Right, so I'm back in the Mark II and it's time for me to take a drive down to see Zak at Power Engineering. Right, so I'm down at Power Engineering with Zak and a few other lads. Zak has been working on his latest project today. His proper Grandad spec Sierra estate. He's put some GAZ coilovers on it and some brand new 17-inch steelies. I think 15, yeah. Alright, so this is Mike FPE,
how you doing, guys?
Who runs one of my favourite channels on YouTube. He's building a sick compound turbo Mark I Fiesta, as well as a 3-door Sierra drift car with his mate, which is running an ST170 turbo engine. So yeah, definitely go and check his channel out. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description of this video. This is Adam, who's building the Sierra with Mike. Just having a look around my piece of shit daily drifter.
It's a great swap for the Sierra.
Right, time for me to do the off. I'll see you lot soon. Take it easy. Hello. So it's now the next day and I'm back round the garage with the Mark II. The weather looks like it's going to be on side today, which is good. I hope I haven't just spoken too soon. I mentioned at the start of this video that I've got some good and bad news about the Mark II, which I'm going to go through now. I'm going to start with the good news. One thing I'm really happy about is that Maud is now registered as historic, which means I get free road tax, which because of the engine swap I've done will save me over 200 quid a year. She's also just passed her MOT test, and for those of you who are watching from outside the UK, that's a test we have to do every year over here to show that our cars are roadworthy. To be honest, because she is now classed as a historic vehicle, I could actually register her to be MOT exempt, but I'd rather have a fresh pair of eyes looking over her once a year, just in case there's anything that I've missed. So now for the bad news. Well, first of all, my insurance is due this month, which means I've had to put money aside which I could have otherwise spent on parts. I do also have money put aside for HPE Motorsport once they finish rebuilding my gearbox. The most annoying bit of bad news I've got about the car at the moment is the fact that she's now leaking oil from her sump. So what I think's going on is the steering rack is a bit too close to the oil sump. Now when I go over bumps or whatever, I think the sump is making contact with the steering rack, which is crushing the gasket a bit and causing it to leak. What I'm going to need to do is raise the engine by spacing it up away from the crossmember, which will make this gap bigger. I've already spaced it up a bit using washers on the engine mounts, and I can't go any further because the exhaust manifold is hitting the floor. So what I'm planning to do now is actually space the crossmember down away from the chassis, and then that will give me the room I need so that I can add more washers to the engine mounts to raise the engine up a bit. So yesterday, on the way home from power engineering, I stopped off at my garage and made these spacers out of a bit of 8mm thick alley that I had lying around. I had to cut them out with a hacksaw, which took absolutely ages, and they look pretty ropey, not very straight cuts, but I have smoothed the corners off with a flat wheel on the drill. I've got this spare crossmember here, so you can see basically how they're going to work. They just sit like that, in between the crossmember and the chassis, and they'll space the crossmember down by 8mm. Now, if you're going to be spacing your crossmember, you're going to need to use longer bolts. So I bought these off of eBay from a company called Retro Bolts UK, and I'll leave a link to their eBay shop in the description of this video. I'll have to remove the crossmember to change the sump gasket anyway, so I can just fit the spacers then. I've ordered a new sump gasket from Neil Dunn, which hopefully should be here before next weekend. I'm going to turn my attention back to my Mark I now. Those of you who watched my last video would have seen me remove the engine and gearbox from the car, and I was actually unable to figure out why the clutch wasn't working. Now the only theory I had to go on was the fact that I used a Ford Ranger clutch release bearing, following some advice online. I've now bought a Mazda RX-8 clutch release bearing, and I can definitely see that the Ford Ranger one is a bit taller than the RX-8 one. So I'm hoping when I put the RX-8 bearing in and put it all back together, I'll have a little bit of free play on the clutch arm, and then I'll be confident that when I put the engine and box back in the car and hook up the hydraulics, the clutch will work. So I'm just going to put the clutch back on the flywheel and then refit the gearbox to the engine with the RX-8 bearing installed and see what's what. So the box is all bolted back up, and we now have a little bit of free play on the clutch arm, which I didn't have before, and that should mean now that the clutch will work. Now, I obviously won't be putting the engine and gearbox back in yet because I need to get my water rail back, and once Zak has finished doing his little modification on it, I'm then going to give it to Carlo, the precision engineer, which conveniently is right opposite power engineering, and he's going to tap it so that I can screw in a temperature gauge sender. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm also going to be getting a light flywheel for this engine before I put it back in the car, and I've got a couple of other little modifications I want to do to the bell housing while it's out as well. But I'm so happy that I've now solved the clutch issue. Right, so I've now taken the gearbox back off the engine, and I've also removed the adapter plate from the engine. I've bolted the adapter plate to the gearbox, and I'll show you why now. Now, when this is all bolted to the engine, there's a couple of holes in this adapter plate which I'm unable to use. One is there, and one is there. And they both line up with these dowels here and here. Now, I want to be able to put a nut and bolt through both of those holes, and the thing that's stopping me is the fact that it's too close to the bell housing here, and the same this side. So now the adapter plate is bolted to the gearbox, I can now mark whereabouts on the bell housing these holes are, and then I can remove the adapter plate and just shave away a little bit of the bell housing, so that then I'll be able to put nuts and bolts through those bits as well, which will obviously hold the gearbox onto the engine a lot more securely. These Caterpillar goggles enable me to look as cool as possible when using power tools. They also protect my eyes. Right, so that's one side done. As you can see, there's plenty of room for the nut, which will obviously be sitting in the middle of that circle when it's actually bolted to the engine. Yeah, so that should be sweet. Now I've just got to do the same thing the other side. Right, so that's the other side done. Just need to get all this dust out of this bell housing now, and then I'll trial fit everything back to the engine. Got the adapter plate back on with the two countersunk bolts that were on it before, but also now with a nut and bolt here and here. I think if you was using this adapter plate on a Crossflow or a Pinto, you would also be able to bolt the adapter plate to the engine here, and I think these two holes here are designed to bolt into the RS2000 sump if you're using a Pinto. With this ST170 engine, all I was able to do was these two and one there, and that was it, which is why I really wanted to utilise these two holes on the adapter plate. Now, if the gearbox slides onto the engine now without any trouble, that means I've shaved enough off of the bell housing. If not, then I'll have to go and shave a little bit more. Right, so the gearbox bolts up flush to the adapter plate. The nuts aren't hindering it, which means I've shaved enough off the bell housing. I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to give my garage a much needed tidy up before I go home. If you thought this video was any good, please do give it a like and a share. And if you haven't already done so, click subscribe and activate the notification bell to be kept right up to date with future uploads. Feel free to follow me on social media, and I'll leave a link to my Facebook and my Instagram in the description of this video. Until next time, thanks for watching.